Well, it is 9 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, at least for us on the West Coast. Anybody joining us from the East Coast, happy lunch break to you. Welcome to the second installation of ShoreTel Training provided by Matrix Networks. I am your host, Ryan Graven. I'm the VP of Marketing over here at Matrix. Joining me this morning is Mr. Jeremy Ness, our Chief Technical Officer. Jeremy, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing excellent, Ryan. Thank you.
Excellent. I see you went Rockstar instead of coffee. Bold choice.
I did.
I can hear the passion in your voice, and I'm excited to be a part of this webinar. A little disappointed we're not via video this morning, as I'm having one of the best hair days I've had this month, but that's not what you came to hear about. You came to hear about the virtualization, VMware, and your ShoreTel. This morning, we are going to walk through the benefits of virtualization, what can be virtualized, best practices for deploying in a virtual environment. We're actually going to walk through a demo of how to set up and launch a virtual voice switch. Talk about some scenarios and best practices, and then a little surprise story time at the end. I just ruined the surprise. Dang it. Standard webinar protocol. Please feel free to chat in at any time. I'll be monitoring the chat as Jeremy takes you through the content this morning. So do feel free to chat at any time. I'll do my best to answer, or if not, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Session is being recorded. You'll all get an email after the session with that recording link. These are all going to be uploaded to YouTube for a later look in. To the next slide. So not everyone is familiar with Matrix Networks on the call, so I'm just going to take a moment to kind of overview who we are and why we're even doing this to begin with. We are a ShoreTel Gold partner out of Portland, Oregon, founded in 1984. Our story is simple. Our owner, still owner, looked around the technological landscape and saw a big gaping hole, a chasm, if you will. That's a chasm drop for you. Between technology and customer service, and knew that he could do it better. So he took the handful of friends and colleagues that he was working with at the time and built the foundation of Matrix Networks. Our approach is much different than other organizations who kind of rely on cookie-cutter solutions. We work with your IT teams to collaborate, implement, and design the best solution that fits your environment. We are truly focused on world-class client service. Some of the logos down below are some of the awesome customers that we have and so proud to represent in a variety of different markets. The reason that we show these is not to boast about who our clients are, but to show you the differentiation in those that we can serve. So we hope that you will look to Matrix as a resource for you as a ShoreTel administrator, and an ongoing support channel that you feel comfortable to reach out to. With that in mind, we're going to move on and begin the presentation. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ryan.
You're welcome.
I think I want to do a little bit of background about myself. Jeremy Ness, the CTO here at Matrix Networks. It's actually in my 5th week here at Matrix. However, I did just previously come from another company where I was a senior admin for 6 years. We actually had a large ShoreTel deployment. We had about 1,600 phones across 130 locations in 8 states. And then I did virtualize pretty much all the headquarters servers, DVS, that type of thing, on a 8-host VMware cluster. So
might I add, one of our customers. So that's an awkward conversation when you steal their senior administrator, but we are really happy to have him.
Happy to be here, Ryan.
Thank you.
So benefits of virtualization, virtualizing. This is just a general overview, not necessarily Matrix or not necessarily ShoreTel, but just really pretty general. Better server utilization. Obviously, kind of the old school model is one operating system, one server. It used to be back in the day. You have your domain controller, you have your file server, you have your database, you have your ShoreTel. But obviously, that domain controller is sitting there with 1% CPU. Same with the file server. So with virtualizing, obviously that's putting multiple operating systems in a single physical PC. Just a lot better use of resources, CPU, RAM, disk, that type of thing. Private cloud enablement. Obviously, once you do go virtual, moving those virtual machines around is really easy. So kind of gears you up to if you ever do want to move off of your on-prem into a hosted solution when you're already virtualized, it becomes much easier. Redundancy and failover, there's more of the VMware or Hyper-V kind of infrastructure underneath to where it gives you high availability. So say you do have 4 hosts, one of them dies, the other host will see that, take the VMs, and do kind of a crash restart on them. So on my environment, I did have a few hosts fail, luckily late at night, but it was about a 4-minute time, and all 12 VMs are backed up. Disaster recovery, image backup. Obviously, if you have a physical host trying to back that thing up, you're probably doing some bare metal, Acronis, or some other product. Trying to restore that onto a physical machine is pretty difficult. Obviously, if it's a different hardware, drivers. I mean, if you guys have ever tried to, restore from like an Acronis backup, a little bit of a nightmare.
I know last time I did it, it was a nightmare.
Oh yeah, that last weekend?
I didn't do it. That was
shocked. So obviously, when you are virtual, using something like Veeam's kind of a big one for VMware, backing up and restoring becomes much easier. And obviously, streaming those VRs to DR location, spinning them up, all that becomes easier once you're in a virtual environment. Centralized administration, obviously, just having a single vSphere client, no matter how many hosts you have, how many VMs you have, it's kind of that single pane of glass to see the health of your entire environment. Reduce cost, CapEx, a little bit of a marketing term there. So obviously on-prem, you do have a quite large capital expenditure to get the vSphere cluster up and working. Obviously, if it's hosted solution, you got OpEx. So kind of depends. Again, on-prem, reduce costs. If you do a 5-year ROI or something like that, I think you will see a definite cost reduction.
Are you suggesting that marketing somehow fluffs the content?
It's been known to happen.
How dare you? Moving on.
So what can be virtualized? As the latest version of ShoreTel 14, really everything can be virtualized. I'd even say virtually everything can be virtualized.
Oh, snap.
So kind of funny story, ShoreTel does have a new product coming out called Connect. Not quite ready for prime time, but it is in controlled release. However, to get to that point where they could do a hosted solution, they actually had to go through all of their own infrastructure and virtualize everything. It's not like you're going to move to ShoreTel Connect, they're going to grab a ShoreGear switch, rack it up for you, put you on it. So they went through, so all the voice switches can now be virtualized. Those are VMware only. Some of these are Hyper-V and some are VMware. I'll touch on those as we go. So again, voice switches, those are your ShoreGear switches that you would traditionally terminate any copper pipelines on, have your hunt groups, have your phones on. So that can now be virtual. Again, that is VMware only due to its being Linux in nature. HQ servers, ShoreTel has been able to virtualize or support that since I think ShoreTel 11, so we're going on like 5 years of them supporting the HQ server. Obviously, that's just a Windows box, so nothing too fancy there. It being Windows, that does work on Hyper-V or VMware. Contact Center, same thing, Windows application, Windows VM, Hyper-V or VMware. Distributed voice servers, same thing, Windows, so it works for you there. Mobility router, that is the whole notion of being able to have your mobile phone, mobile device, and have your extension follow you, be able to dial from your phone, go Wi-Fi to cellular, all of that. That is Linux, so that's VMware only. And session border controller. In ShoreTel world, it's going to be your separator. So if you do have SIP trunks to add compatibility with really any SIP provider, you do need to terminate those SIP trunks into the separator and then pass it on to the ShoreTel. So again, VMware only, as that is a Linux-based appliance. Time for a demo. So demoing today, we're going to be deploying a virtual phone switch. So to do that, we're going to go into our director here. So really it just consists of an OVA file that you deploy onto the vSphere cluster. So to get that OVA file, you have a few options. On the physical, or on the virtual headquarters server under the NetHub hub directory, there's an OVA in there that you can deploy, or it's almost easier, it's just go like you're going to add a new switch and the OVA link is there. While I'm adding a switch, we'll look at the fact that there are vPhone switches, vTrunk switches, and virtual collaboration or appliance collaboration. So vPhone switch and a trunk switch are actually the same exact OVA. So when you deploy that OVA, you just really need to tell ShoreTel how to use that resource. The virtual appliance collaboration, your IM, your video, that type of thing, that is a separate OVA. So we're going to click on the vPhone switch, and here's our download link for the OVA. It's very small. You see it's 25 megabytes. Let's save that guy. Now we go into our vSphere client. So as you can see, I just have a single host. This is a demo system we have here at Matrix Networks. Obviously, we really don't condone you deploying your entire ShoreTel infrastructure on a single host. Really, need to have that 2-3 vSphere cluster to give you that HA. So if a host ever does die, you can restart that VM on another host. So we go to our deploy OVF. Obviously, OVF and OVA, some minor differences, but more or less interchangeable. So when this does deploy, it is going to use 20 gigs of space, mostly log files and such. If you do that SIP trunk or the V trunk, if you do call recordings, like on SIP lines, that call recordings can be stored on that disk. Let's name it. And we just have one data store since we're single hosts. And OVA being 25 megabytes, this deploys extremely quickly. Go ahead and take a peek at the settings. So we will, while the appliance is loading, we'll go and touch on the actual requirements of how many phones you can have, how many SIP trunks, how much resource utilization, that type of thing you need. But out of the box, we're looking at 2 gigs of RAM, 1 vCPU, and then that 20 gig disk. If you ever do need a larger disk, you do need to do that now. Again, that's really only applicable if you're doing SIP recordings on the trunk switch. Just when we do start the appliance, part of the set of procedures is formatting all the partitions on it. So no real easy way to increase that in the future. So that's just one of those pro tips. If you ever think you need more space than 20, you need to do that before you power on and program the switch.
Consummate professional. Dropping pro tips on the audience. I love it.
There you go. So the switch needs very little information. Basically, we're going to static the IP address, and we're going to give it the IP address of the directory. That's really about it. So pretty simple here. So of course, we're going to static. Really always want to static. Switches don't do well, or ShoreTel appliances don't do well in DHCP. But however, if in your environment, you do have the whole DHCP reservation. Ran into plenty of admins that have just set up a reservation for MAC address. That is also fine. How you would want to do that before you turn on the appliance. Nothing so exciting here. It's your normal Class C.
Speak for yourself.
And yes, that is correct. So now it's going to bring up the Ethernet interface. At this point, you could ping it if you wanted to verify things are up. So now it is going to want to know what our director IP address is. That is it. As you can see, as mentioned, it's going to format the partitions and set that all up. A few minutes of pretty white scrolling text. So while that's happening, let's go and touch on the requirements needed for the switches. So here's kind of overall things you can virtualize with VMware and ShoreTel. Obviously, the HQ and DVSs for your distributed voice services. I think those have been supported for almost 5+ years now. So here's just kind of overall guidelines. 50 users, kind of got 2 vCPUs. Once you kind of hit that 1,000 or so, you do want to bump that up. So again, I assume most of you guys have your headquarters servers already virtualized. So virtual phone switch, these are those on the drop-down. We looked at the vPhone and the vTrunk. Those are those 2 appliances. As you can see with the virtual phone, it is just 1 vCPU, and then it really just depends how much resources it needs. Always with a 2 gig RAM, always at 20 gig of disk. With the SIP trunk, pretty heavy utilization on the cores. You can see up to 100 SIP trunks if you need the 4 cores, 8 cores and 24. So a single trunk switch can support up to 500 SIP trunks. That's your virtual appliance. Like I mentioned, that is a separate OVA than the phone and the trunk switches for your audio, your web, and your IM. Then finally, that session border controller or your separator. Again, that's going to be the middleman that kind of adds compatibility. for the ShoreTel to consume any SIP trunks. It's kind of joke that SIP is more of a framework than a protocol in terms of different vendors implement different parts of it, so not a lot of compatibility across the board with SIP. So I got plenty of our white text. So oh, there we go. All right, so if you've ever used a console cable into a ShoreTel switch before, this will look extremely familiar because it's exactly the same.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, you're promoting in the ShoreTel switches all the time.
All the time.
Busting out your serial cable and plugging that guy in. Okay, yeah. So really all we need out of here is the MAC address to tell the director the MAC to add. So drag that guy here and there. Do the extremely creative name, virtual switch, all right, so IP address, and that MAC address. All right. So we can configure the max amount of IP phones, as we did see in that chart. Okay. So this is actually in the ShoreTel doc, so if you already have a ShoreTel director, you actually scroll down to the docs and do the install guide. It does give you this chart. As you can see, we have the one vCPU. We're actually just going to shoot for 250 phones. So we're going to tell director we only want 250 phones. Here's another pro tip for you. You can actually set that to 0, deploy the switch. It will never allot any phones to it, but you can move hunt groups over to it. So if you do have any physical short gear switches that are starting to hit their resource limit, too many hunt groups in conjunction with POTS lines or phones, you can actually spin up one of these totally free of charge and move hunt groups over to it. So kind of a cool way to help mitigate resource utilization on some of your physical switches. All right, done. So just like any switches you add, it does take a few minutes for the director to reach out, verify firmware, and that type of thing. While that is going, so we did touch on the fact, 250 phones, what I set the switch up for, as you can see, there's just one vCPU or one core needed. However, you do really need to set the CPU reservations for the size you're going to do. So set 250 phones, so I'm going to go back over into VMware, and we got our resources tab. So this will be our reservation. So if you ever do have a host that is oversubscribed, and you have a VM that starts going a little crazy sitting next to this guy, it can start choking out the resources of your virtual phone switch. That's bad. Bad things happen. Phones start dropping off, that type of thing. So you do always want to make sure to set the CPU reservation for the size of appliance size of phones you're going to have. All right. Also look and see on this doc. So these are all the different options you can have. So again, your 250 phones, what we're looking at. So again, you can backup auto tenant, your make me conferences, that's when you hit the conference on the phone, opposed to make me conference. Your physical switches kind of start off with 3 resources, you go up to 6. So this guy gives you up to 12, so it's 12 concurrent calls across your whole organization to the make me. Potential monitoring buttons, again, you got your hunt groups, and your VCAs. So the virtual trunk switch, similar to the other chart we saw, again, pre-CPU intensive. Doc is a little dated. 5.0 through 5.5 are supported, and 6.0 is now officially supported too. So if you're on that bleeding edge of your vSphere infrastructure, 6.0 is supported. So as you kind of expect, the features for your SIP trunk is SIP trunks and backup auto attendant.
Imagine that.
So, yeah, pretty elaborate chart here to have TVSs on it, but just make sure everybody's on the same page. Back to our director, and here we go. You guys just witnessed us deploying a virtual switch on our vSphere cluster. So at this point, we can move over 250 phones to this guy. Like I mentioned, hunt groups, all that type of stuff. So last thing I do want to touch on is, of course, your substantial cost savings not deploying a physical switch But ShoreTel does still like to get their money. They're a corporation. So under licenses, we do have the few down here. So for any phone that you do deploy on the virtual switch, you do need a corresponding phone license. That pretty much adds up the system, and then you do still need your extension and or mailbox for the phone in addition.
Too bad we were just offering a BOGO on that, but it ended yesterday.
There you go. So that is it as far as the directory piece. So
it's still not my turn to talk. You still have a couple slides.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I assume you guys didn't come to hear the marketing guy anyway.
No,
so
nobody ever does.
Deploying VMware considerations. Of course, that is the one thing about any virtualization is you just really need to manage the resources correctly. I said setting that CPU reservation. It's pretty much all you got to do, at least for that phone switch. So again, CPUs, making sure you have enough CPU, memory, that type of thing. I didn't point out, but the appliance does deploy with the current VMware tools. So in terms of if the cluster ever does any kind of poke that VM to grab any resource back, any memory, it does have the full VMware tools. So network storage, again, there's a chart somewhere of the throughput needed. Obviously, it has to do with concurrent calls, that type of thing, but it's very small. Less than a megabyte a second, I think, is kind of at idle. And then, of course, ramps up depending on how many resources you're using. Storage, again, such as that 20 gigs of RAM in terms of the disk storage, and very low IOPS. But again, if your storage is already saturated, any VM really doesn't like that, 50 to 100 millisecond response time. So really, VMware best practice is going to be, that sub 10 millisecond on your iSCSI or fiber channel SAN. Again, NAS and SAN, just really important. Just like all things, or I'd say the ShoreTel even more than most things, it being a real-time appliance does get real cranky if you, again, start having real huge spikes in your response time and your storage.
Haha! Surprise slide.
Thank you, Ryan, for that amazing.
I feel like it basically says approachable yet sophisticated. No, but this is a moment where we'd like to break out and give you a brief kind of use case scenario. Jeremy does come from an environment where this is very applicable, so I wanted to give him a spotlight to kind of talk about his experience that maybe you guys can apply to your own environment.
So my previous employer, at the time I think we had about 120 locations. We had our VMware infrastructure. We started to deploy SIP just as far as a huge cost savings at all those brick and mortar locations we had. Of course, we're looking at 5 to 10 POTS lines per, the low price of $50 a piece, how often they get used, that type of thing. So we did start deploying SIP, huge cost savings, almost immediately realized, but we find ourselves opening new branches, still having that ShoreTel switch sitting there with no POTS lines plugged into it, basically on a phone resource, hunt groups, and we did use it for warehouse paging, overhead paging. So kind of looking at like why, completely unnecessary to have the physical switches there. Just another thing in the rack, more heat, more UPS draw, that type of thing. So we did deploy the virtual phone switch. It worked out great. All of a sudden I was able to deploy whole branches with 0 on-premise ShoreTel equipment. As I did mention, we have that warehouse paging. Matrix did recommend an ACA for us, SIP connected, so we were still able to do the overhead paging with that traditional kind of bogan amp, paging horn, that type of thing. So again, just another piece I'd open in a branch. For us, it was doing PCs, router switch, anything I could take off the list was great. So just skipping that whole step of even have to mess with grabbing a ShoreTel switch in the back room, program it, ship to site, have it racked, etc., etc. So again, if you're not looking at SIP today, or you are still deploying physical ShoreTel switches, but you have a virtual environment already, I think it can kind of be a big win, cost and time-wise across the board.
See, I told you that was going to be worth it.
There you go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I'm sure you are all very busy and don't mind getting out of class early. I want to thank you, Jeremy and I want to thank you for being a part of this. Matrix Networks is built on a culture of knowledge sharing and being a true communication partner. So we hope that this ongoing series of educational classes, makes you a better administrator, Next month's session is on the collaboration suite. We're really looking forward to diving deep into that. I might actually be able to contribute to that conversation because I use it on a daily basis.
Yeah, don't kid yourself.
Well, I'm going to try. Please do send any inquiries to info@mtrx.com. We are here as a resource for you. Again, the slide deck and recording will be sent to you via email as well as available on our website and YouTube. For now, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Congratulations on making it almost halfway through the week, and we look forward to talking with you next time. Until then, Jeremy and Ryan signing off.